Hey there, this is Seth Schaefer from Team Just Cause Robotics, and today's video is going to show how to complete all of the mechanical assembly for the SSP standard kit. Now, if you haven't done all of the wiring and soldering already, make sure to watch the other video that I'll link down in the description and will be linked above this in the text-based guide, which shows how to do all of the wiring. Or if you bought a soldered kit from me, then you don't have to worry about it because it's already been done for you, and you can move right along with this assembly process. In this guide, I'll be cutting back and forth a bit because I filmed everything concurrently with the brushless version of the kit, as well as switching between 3 different models of radio transmitters that you can use with the SSP kit. I'm showing how to use a FlySky FSI-6 radio and a Radiomaster Zorro dual joystick radio, as well as a Radiomaster MT12 pistol grip style radio, and I'll show how to do all of the things that you need to do with any of those radio models as we move forward here. So make sure you have your radio at hand and charged as you follow along. So we've finally got all the electronics set up for both the brushed and brushless versions of the kit, so now it's time for the mechanical assembly. A lot of this is going to be identical between the two, but obviously the drive motor mounts are different and the motors are different. So I'm just going to show the brushed version and then I'll swap over to brushless to show what that upgrade would look like if you decided to purchase the motors and speed controllers later. So tools, what do we need? Well, most of the screws in the kit are a special type of screw called a plastite screw or thread rolling screw, and they have a special head that is a Torx T15 star bit. So I've got that on this driver and also on this red motorized screwdriver. I strongly recommend picking up an electric screwdriver like this because there's a lot of screws that you'll need to screw in and unscrew whenever you want to pull the lid off to swap your battery or charge it or anything between fights. And you'll be doing that a lot, and there's 15 screws or so on the top, so it's a lot easier and faster to have one of these. Actually, I think there's fewer now, but still like 10 or so screws on the top you have to worry about. You're going to need a pair of long needle nose pliers to grab the hex nuts for the front drive axles, so recommend something like this. I also have a nice Knipex wrench here, but I'm not sure if that can really reach into the nooks and crannies needed, so I'll just have that in reserve. And then you will need the 2mm hex wrench that comes in your hardware kit, which I have right here. And I believe other than that, the only other thing you'll need is a 4mm hex wrench for tightening the fork mount bolts. And so I've got a whole metric set here. I'll just grab the 4mm wrench out of that and use that when needed. All right, if I do need something else that I forgot, I'll mention it as we go along. Start off with, we're going to mount the motherboard inside of the chassis. And to do that, we're going to be using the 3 of the 4 provided 1/4 inch long plastite screws here. So we'll just get the screw on the end of the screwdriver, line up through one of the holes, and that threads in. I forgot to mention this has an adjustable clutch, so I just have it on the lowest setting for all the threads going into plastic, since they don't need to be overly tight, and they shouldn't be able to vibrate out of place. All right, motherboard's installed. Next, we are going to install the servo. Now, sometimes your chassis won't be perfectly flat on the bottom. That's pretty normal, and it shouldn't impact the functionality at all, but you'll notice this can rock a little bit. It's just because the machining process for the USMW billet chassis can cause it to warp slightly. So we want to install a servo. Servo goes in this orientation. You have to bend the wire back flat like this, and it can just slot in here. We're going to have to assemble the arm and everything with this, but we want to first be able to plug this in because we need to set the servo's angle in order to properly use it. So this is going into from the left, the 3rd row of pins, and we want the signal wire to be towards the inside, towards the FS2A receiver. So just remember this bright orange wire towards the inside should be like right where that black button is on the FS2A receiver. So now we're going to plug in our battery and we can power the robot up, and that'll allow us to control the servo. Plug that in. If your motherboard isn't switched on already, switch it on. So first things first, I'm going to show what the binding procedure will look like. I'm going to show this outside the robot because it's kind of hard to show when it's all like far away from the camera and zoomed in like this. But on the motherboard, you can see the FS2A receiver. If I turn on my camera light, you can see it even better. And the FS2A receiver has this little black button right here. That is the button used for binding and setting failsafes. And so all you have to do with your kit is basically make sure that you turn on the power switch to the motherboard by tightening the screw, which I'll do on this kit right here. And then when you plug in your battery, you can hold down that black button while you do so, and it should start doing a rapid blue flashing, indicating that it is in bind mode. Now, if you don't have a radio connected and you didn't hold the button properly, you'll instead see this slow blue blinking, indicating that it's looking for a signal from a transmitter, but it doesn't see one that has been bound to successfully before. So just keep in mind that's what this will look like inside of the kit. I just want to show it outside so that it was a lot clearer on camera. So I'm going to hold down the black button on the FS2A in the kit while I plug in the battery, and we should see that fast blue blinking as we see here. And now we'll start with the FSI6 because it's the easiest. So for the FSI6, first you got to make sure all your switches are pointed up and your throttle's all the way down every time you turn it on. Otherwise, it does some annoying warnings at you like that. And then all we have to do is hold down here where it says bind key as we power it on. So we're going to hold down the bind key and then switch it on, and we should see RX binding. And we already see the FS2A is now doing a slow blink. And then we just turn this off and on again, and we can now control the kit. So that's with the FSI6. Now let's repeat the same process again, but with the Radiomaster Zorro, where binding is slightly less convenient. So let's put this back into bind mode, hold the button, insert the battery. Now let's show the process for binding the Radiomaster Zorro. Now for the Zorro, it's a little bit more involved. There isn't a bind key on here. Instead, we have to go into the model menu, tab over, and then scroll down. And if this is the first time that you've done this, you'll have to set the internal RF mode from off to multi, and then set the type to FlySky 2A. Scroll down here until we see three options: receiver 00, BND, and range. So this is BND for bind. So all we do is hit bind, and then we see that fast blink turns into a slow blink, and then we can just hit the return key. And now, once again, we have control over the servo. Now I'll show that bind process again for the Radiomaster MT12. All right, so now it's time to do everything with the Radiomaster MT12. Now this radio will have a few extra things we need to do because it's a pistol grip, so there isn't an obvious way to control the arm. So I'll show a couple different options for how you can do that with a 3-position switch here, or with one of these knobs. And there's also a bunch of other inputs you could use on this. And I'll show just in general how you can map different inputs to doing that if you'd like to use something else. But generally you're going to be holding the radio like this. So you want whatever you're using to be within reach of your two hands while you're doing it. So first things first, of course, we have to bind it to the robot. So once again, bind procedure, we hold down the FS2A button and then plug in the battery, and we get a fast blue blinking light on the FS2A. And then we go to the model page over until we see this page 2, and then we're going to scroll down. We need to turn the internal RF mode to multi, type to FlySky 2A, and then bind. And now we should be able to hit return. And it looks like that worked. All right, it's going to complain about failsafe not set every time, unless we go scroll up from page 2. I think there's an option here. Yeah, failsafe not set. You can just set this to no pulses, and because the FS2A ignores whatever you do on the radio, you actually have to hold the button on the FS2A while sending the inputs you want to be the failsafe. But since we haven't configured the arm yet, let's not do that just yet. So now, how do we actually control the arm? Well, the arm's still connected to signal channel 3 on the receiver, but if we scroll over to our inputs page, page 4 here, there is nothing assigned to channel 3. So let's fix that. We'll select it, and then You can name it if you want, but source is the important thing. So you want to select here and then do whatever input you want to control it. So in this case, I've got S1, which is this knob, or I can do this switch, which is SA or switch A. And there's other things like this thing on the back here is actually a button. That's switch D. So if you wanted to, you could even like press this up against your belly while you're driving, I guess. But in this case, for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to set it to switch A. And then we're going to confirm that. So we've got the input switch A. That's good. Return. Oh, right. We still have to assign it to a mix, so it gets assigned to an output. So now we go to channel 3. And our source for 3 is 3. Return, return. And now I think, yeah, there we go. So now we have control over the arm with the switch because we created a mix to assign the output to the number 3 input. Now, right now by default, the middle position is going to be the middle no matter what you do, but pushing in makes the arm go up and pushing out makes the arm go down. I'd like to reverse that. So now I'm going to go over to the outputs page, go down to channel 3, and we're going to hit edit. And here we're going to set the direction to be the way we want. So I'm going to set it to the middle position right now, and direction, I'm going to select that until it goes to INV for inverted. So now when I push in, it goes down, and I push out, it goes up. Also, we control the kit in whatever position that we want it to be in when it fail-safes. So let's say I want the arm to fail-safe to this angle. You can just hold the black button on the receiver again until it blinks. And then if we turn the radio off and it loses signal, the arm stays in that position. And if it was lowered to the ground and we turn the radio off and it loses signal, it returns to that same position we just set. So this will also be required for any time you want to enter your kit into a competition. You need to make sure you set your fail safes so that the drive would stop if it loses a signal. And right now I just set the fail safe position to there. So if I turn off the radio, fail safe's right back there. And this is completely independent of which radio transmitter you're using. That's all taken care of on the receiver itself. Now the reason we did all that is because we need to now set the servo arm position. So let's assemble the servo arm. I'll unplug the battery for now just so we don't waste any charge. Start with assembling the standard arm in this case. So we need 3 of our long shoulder bolts and we need our 2 arm forks. So to start off with, we're going to stick shoulder bolts through one of the arms like so. And then stick those bolts through these holes in the TPU arm. And this should just press into place. Might take a bit more force on some of them due to tolerances being a little different. Now on this one, we're going to be using what are called PEM nuts or flush nuts. These are in this pocket of the hardware kit here. I'm going to pull out the screws so those aren't in the way. We'll use those for something else. So we just need 3 of these flush nuts. And now we got to pay attention to the directionality here. So the nut goes with the hex side facing outside and the fork point facing this way. So it's going to be like that. And we want the nut to be pulled in. Now these are sometimes a little annoying. This is where those little fancy pliers can come in. Those kind of pressed into place so they're just about flush with the surface of the steel, hence the name flush nut. You might be able to tap these in with a hammer if you don't have a fancy set of parallel gripping pliers like I do. And again, tolerances on laser cut parts vary, so some of these will be easier than others. So we've got those all pressed into place. Now we'll just stick this here. Now these can use a 3mm hex wrench, or you should also often be able to use the T15 forks bit, even though it's not really designed for this. Let's get those all fairly tight. They don't have to be crazy tight, but we want the arms to be parallel. So like that, have the threads sticking out about evenly on the backside there. and that should be good enough. And we'll make sure that this sits flat, and it does. Both of those fork tips can touch the ground. So that's good. Now we've got our steel servo arm that fits in this nicely form-fitting pocket there. And we need one of those 12mm long M3 flathead screws that'll drop straight into this pocket here. And then with our 2mm hex wrench, we can press that down all the way into the pocket, and then we should be able to tighten it and pull the servo arm in all the way. Until we get the thread just about flush with the end here. There we go. Now, this guy, we're going to power up again because we want the servo arm to be in the downmost position. So we'll make sure our stick's all the way down. We're going to pull the servo out and stick this on and just see kind of where it falls. And we're going to try and get it so it's basically flush to the floor here. This way we can make sure that the arm is nice and ground scraping for us. Just get in the closest position you can, that's pretty good. And then we'll adjust the end points later. We just needed to be able to do that so that we didn't put the arm on in a position where the servo would stall out trying to shove it through the chassis at some point, because that would be a problem. So before we completely install the servo, we have to grab another of our long shoulder bolts and then our pivot support part. Stick the bolt all the way through the pivot support and then all the way through this hole, and it'll thread into the end of the servo. This one I want to get a bit tighter because it's a metal on metal thread. There we go. So we've still got full control of the servo, everything's working just fine. We can now remove power because it won't be able to spin into a position we don't want it to be in on its own. Sit that down. It'll be like this when fully assembled. However, with the servo in place, it's hard to get the drive axles in the front, so let's pull this out for now. We can even unplug the servo because we know that it's now positioned properly, and set this aside for the moment and get the front wheels attached. All right, so getting on the front wheels, we start with our two front wheels. These are the ones that have just a circular hole, not a hex-shaped big hole. And we've got our two bushings. Now these bushings have a shoulder on one end. That shoulder should face away from the toothed pulley part of the wheel. You should be able to just push them into place just like that, with a little nub of aluminum sticking out on that side and the big shoulder sticking out on this side. And just repeat that process once again for the second front wheel. Now, we also need to make sure we get our belts on here. So we're going to grab our timing belts, stick them through, and we're going to grab our two more of our shoulder bolts, and we're going to grab the M3 nylock nuts. Now these are different from the PEM flush nuts from before. These ones are a lot thicker. They have a little nylon insert on one end, and that allows them to basically be their own thread locker. We will have to use a thread locker like Loctite blue on some of the screws later on in this assembly process, but these don't need them. So this is where we need those long needle nose pliers. I'll turn off my radio because it's just wasting battery right now. So grab our long needle nose pliers after we get this kind of started. We'll grab our shoulder bolt, and shoulder bolt is going to go into this hole on this side and this hole on this side. And remember, you want your pulley facing towards the center here. So we're just gonna shove this into place. Loop the belt through first, because you can't get it on after that bolt's passed through. Now, of course, it's not gonna be as easy. Oh, just kidding. It was just as easy again. So now we've got the belt on the wheel, and we can see as we pull the belt, the wheel can turn with it. We don't have the nut on yet, so that's the next step. So we will grab our long needle nose pliers, grab the nut really firmly here. And there we go. This doesn't have to be super tight or anything, it just needs to have the thread pass the nylon portion of the nut and be like kind of on there. So this should still spin pretty freely when the belt's not, you know, getting tied up in it or whatever. And now we just repeat that again on the left side. So once again, belt through there, pulley on the inside, shoulder bolt, line up the hole in the chassis with the bushing, stick that through so the thread sticks through. Then grab the nut with the long needle nose pliers, just kind of press it up against there. Once you get like a couple threads on and it's like properly aligned and not crooked, the first few threads should go on because it won't hit the nylon until it gets to about there, and then you really need the wrench to tighten the rest away. There we go. And there's the second front wheel. Spins nice and freely, and again turns nicely with the belt. Cool. Now we need to get the rear wheels assembled. So the rear wheels have these hex hubs that go with them. If I can get them out of here. So these hex hubs are the main thing that we need to apply a thread locker to. For this, I usually recommend something like Loctite Blue. I think 242 is what this is, but of course the sticker label covers it up. Yeah, thread locker 242. So I'm just gonna dispense this onto the bag that the XT30s came in. You could use, or some other bag if you have one lying around, just some plastic surface that won't absorb it. Cap this again, because that should be plenty. Now these hubs should have M4 set screws installed in them that look like this. Ideally in the hex portion. If not, you're going to need to install the nuts in the hex portion after getting some Loctite on them. So I'm just going to dip the screw in the Loctite, just get like a big dollop on there, and thread that in. And repeat on this one. And we're just gonna go, so it's a bit past flush for now. We can pull them back out later if the shaft doesn't fit through. And rinse and repeat for hub number 2. Great. Now, hex portion towards the hex side. You'll notice on the other side it's round, so it's because inside of this there's a hex portion where the pulley is, and then it switches to round. And you got to make sure you line up the set screw holes with the holes in the wheel so you can actually tighten them onto the motor shaft afterwards. And that should just push in, and it should stop itself from going in further when you reach the end of where the hex portion is. And then same for this one. Just make sure the set screw lines up nicely there. Perfect. Now I'm just going to stick my 2mm hex wrench in, and I'm just going to unscrew a little bit just to make sure that the motor shafts can fit through. Note that you should have 4mm bore hex hubs if you have the brushed version of the kit. If you're running the brushless version that has 6mm shafts, and you'll have larger looking holes in your hex hubs for the 6mm shaft version. So we unscrew those. Now, if you look carefully at the DartBox Dragon motor shaft, you'll notice there's a flat on one portion. We need one of the 2 set screws to be over that shaft flat. So just stick that on there like so. And it goes like all the way back, and I'm just gonna stick it forward just a tiny bit past there, just so it's not rubbing on the face of the gearbox, and then tighten up that set screw pretty darn well onto the flat of the shaft, and now these should turn together. And then we'll just tighten up the other set screw as well. There we go. Rinse and repeat on motor number 2. Again, I forgot to mention this, but yeah, the pulley side towards the face of the gearbox, of course, towards the motor. So again, set screw 1 on the flat of the motor shaft. Set screw 2, opposite that. Pretty tight. There we go. And now we can install these into our DartBox motor mount. So we've got these 2 holes that go all the way through and line up on the bottom with these holes in the chassis. So this should slot in just like so. But first we want the motors to go in. Now you can have the PCB facing front or the back, I believe, but it's easiest to have PCB facing the back and wires towards the front, like shown here. And both motors are wired identically, so it doesn't matter which goes on which side. Once we've got both of those in, we're going to loop the belts through onto the pulleys. And then we can get this to sit nice and flush down here, and we should see that the belts are fairly taut, ideally, when we pull back on this. And once it's screwed into place, they should have some tension and turn the front wheels as well. Now this one's a little bit loose, but I can adjust the mounts in the future, so it should be a bit tighter. But it should work just as well. So we're gonna hold the motors in place while I flip this over. And we can see those holes here, how they line up. So here's where we're gonna take 4 of our black 1/2 inch plastite screws, not these longer 3/4 inch silver ones. And I'm just gonna hand start that one and this one. And just pulling kind of backwards on this so that, or squeezing it against the back of the chassis so that I keep the belt tension. I'll secure that. Oops, I turned the clutch up too much. There we go. And repeat with these 2. There we go. If your screw heads don't look like they go all the way flush to the bottom of the chassis, you might want to increase the clutch setting or just tighten them by hand a bit more. There we go. Now we have a nice rolling chassis, and we can see the back wheels and front wheels turn together as we expect, and the belts are a little bit loose in this one again, but you should be able to turn the back wheel and see the front wheel turn. So as long as that's happening, it should function just fine. Great. We're already like more than halfway done. Next, we want to clamp these motors in place. So we've got our left and our right motor clamps. These won't be secured in place until we put the lid on. So, but just so you know how they'll line up eventually, they'll be sitting just like this. So just don't forget to put those on before we put the lid on. Next, let's install the servo properly. So we've got 4 holes in the bottom of our pivot support that line up with these 4 holes in the chassis. And again, the servo slots into place like so. And this wire can just kind of stretch over the top of this. And we need to plug in to the 3 pins for channel 3. And then we'll install the servo retainer plate. It's just an aluminum plate, 2 holes in it. Again, with our 1/2 inch black plastite screws. One, 2. There we go. Super easy. We can now flip this over and we should see those holes more or less line up. You might want to shift this back and forth a little bit until it lines up perfectly. There's a little bit of extra space there. And we just took 4 more of those same 1/2 inch black plastites in. Alrighty. Our servo is now properly secured. You can hear it being back driven. Cool. Next, we can install the WEKA ESC and then make sure that everything is functioning as it should. So for the WEKA, we'll start with the signal cables because they're a little tricky. So we'll do yellow wire on the channel 2 signal and the white wire to channel 1 signal with the black wire on the outside, matching like the servo connector. So should look like that. So you got your black wire on the outside, then the red, then the white, and then the yellow is just next to the white, and then the orange for the servo. And then for power to the WEKA, we can plug into any of these 3 ports. Doesn't really matter which. And for the motors, it doesn't matter too much which way you do this, which is A and which is B, but I'm just going to decide to make the right motor be A and the left motor B. So we'll do this, red to red, black to black, and here again, red to red, black to black. Boom, all your wiring is done. Now I didn't put hot glue on the motherboard before, so I would recommend you maybe add some hot glue to your motherboard to insulate it. Just make sure not to cover up that black button. Wow, this was heating up for way too long. You just don't want to get it inside of any of your not populated connectors. I'm not going to go too crazy with it right now. The WEKA ESC can kind of sit underneath or above the battery with the 3-cell battery. When we plug the battery in, we should see that we can control the arm, and if we lift up the bot so it doesn't drive off the table, we should be able to control the drive. Now you'll notice it's not doing what we want. If I push forward on the stick, it's actually going to try and turn left. And if I push backward, it'll try and turn right. But I'll show you how to fix that real quick. So the WEKA ESC has this awesome Simon Says calibration mode, but we have to enable that mode for it to activate because we don't want it to activate by accident in the middle of a fight. There's a specific thing you have to do to activate it. So let's do that now. So first we're going to turn the bot off. Then we're going to turn it back on, and immediately we're just going to jiggle one of the drive sticks. I'd recommend you have something that you can put the bot on to balance it so that it doesn't drive away from you when you do this. So let's grab some box of screws I had lying around. There we go. All right. So now we're just going to jiggle the stick forward and backward a bunch of times. Great. So now, at risk of this driving away from us, I'm going to stick it on the table. We'll push this right stick again. So it just turned to the left, so we're going to push left. Now it just drove backwards, so we're going to hit backwards. And then it's going to keep blinking. We're just going to hit something on the sticks again just to confirm we want braking enabled. And now, whoops, when we push forward, the robot drives forward. When we push left, the robot turns left. Push right, robot turns right. Push backward, bot goes backwards. And I'll just show it with it on the thing we're balancing on. So forward, backward, left, right, and we can see the wheels all doing exactly what we'd expect. So we know that we now have the drive, everything configured properly. So that's pretty much it for assembling the kit. Obviously there's some other add-ons that we haven't put together yet, but I'll show how to assemble one of the fork configs for the front end, and then we'll slap the lid on and we'll have a complete ready to run SSP kit. So first things first, let's just turn this guy off. All right, so let's assemble the barb tipped forks. So the way that these fork mounts work, they dovetail into the chassis like this, and then the fork is going to be like you see here. And for these, we need our M5 nuts as well. So we're going to need our M5 nuts and M5 by 40 millimeter bolts, which are these long black guys here. So I'm just going to grab 4 of each of those. 2, 3, 4. All right, now this is super simple. I'm sure you don't need me to explain it, but there's a hex imprint where the nut goes. You stick the hex nut into it. Then you stick the fork in between and sandwich it, and then you stick the bolt through Just might want to put your finger here so that the nut doesn't get pushed out. You should be able to push it all the way through, although this one's being a little bit difficult. There we go. And then we'll just finger tighten it a little bit. And repeat on bolt number 2. Here is where you're going to want that 4mm hex wrench. And we are not going to tighten this a crazy amount, but you should basically just have it kind of gripping the fork. And you should see the threads coming out the other side like you see here. There we go. And now rinse and repeat for the second one if you want to run the 2 barb forks. Just for the sake of demonstration, because I have the other type of fork, I'm just going to show on the other side how you can assemble the claw forks. So here, we just use the topmost hole, and we go through just the top hole here. And then, again, we want our hex nut in here. Start by finger tightening. Now on the claw forks, the idea is these are hinged forks, so we actually don't want to tighten this so it's like grabbing on like this. We want it loose. We want it so that it hinges freely here. So we just want the threads a little bit in here. And it can help actually to add a little bit of Loctite to this nut and bolt. So I'll just do that now, because there isn't a ton preventing it from unscrewing itself otherwise. Since it's not super tight, we want this to hinge freely so that it rides on the floor no matter what the angle the robot is at, as you can see here. So obviously you wouldn't normally run one of each type of fork, but I'm just showing that they go on the exact same way. Just dovetail slot into place like so. Now we'll show how to put on the lid. So remember, first you put your motor clamps on. R for right, L for left, the arrow's pointing towards the wheels. Next, we take our lid and we put it over the top facing the correct way. These 2 big holes kind of line up with those 2 screws that clamp the servo into place. Make sure your WEKA isn't sneaking under your motor clamps. And if you're having trouble getting the lid in place, kind of sandwiching everything down, it'll probably might be because you have some wires crossing places they shouldn't. So it might be a little finicky the first couple times, but eventually when the wires have been sitting in the correct position for a while, they kind of just remember their shape and it gets a lot easier. So there we go. Now for the top screws, this is important. There are 4, or you're going to want 4 of these 6 longer silver screws to clamp the motors into place. Whoops, just lost one. So we'll start out without using those. We'll start out with just the regular 1/2-inch plastites. There's a bunch of. I'll just put like any 2 of them in, just so we get the lid loosely lined up where it needs to be. There we go. And now we want the 4 silver screws to go into these 4 holes. And here you might want to turn your clutch setting a bit higher on your electric driver. There we go. So now the motors are clamped very securely in place, and we should have really good belt tension. And you can see that with the lid stiffening everything up, we're no longer getting the front wheel slipping if we even try and drive from the front wheel. So everything's looking pretty good there. And now we just add the rest of the top screws, and then we can drive the kit around, and you have a completely assembled, ready to fight SSP kit, though hopefully yours has matching forks. There we go. Now, if we turn this guy back on, we can drive it around. Well, I just finished assembling the brushed version of the kit, so now it's time to show how to upgrade to the brushless drive version. All right, now since we're going to be messing with the electronics, it's usually a good idea to unplug and remove the battery. Plus, we're going to be switching to a different battery anyway, so we won't be needing this one again. We'll also want to remove the 4 screws that are holding in the motor mounts and unplug the WEKA dual ESC and all of its associated connections. So this can be set aside. The motors should pop out and we can just unloop them from the belts. And then we'll just pop out 4 bottommost screws, securing the drive motor insert for the DartBox motors. There we go. Now we can set all of those things aside because we won't be needing them, and instead grab the Blitz Lights and the Blitz Lite mounts, which look like this. So the Blitz Lite mounts, there's a left and a right. They have this kind of dovetail section on the back, which is where the wire guards will go. In the back they look like this. These ones, I have a version 67 emblazoned on here. You might have a different version that might look slightly different, depending on when you receive your kit. Now, I already showed how to solder the motors to the speed controllers, but here they are. And we also are going to need 6 M3 by 8mm screws. They're just a shorter version of the M3 by 12s we used earlier, so not this size. This size is what we want. So, pretty straightforward to start off with. There's kind of a channel back here, which is just clearance between the motor can and the back of the chassis, because you can't 3D print an infinitely thin wall. This channel here is where the wires of the motor will go. And you'll notice if you look the front, if you look down here, you should be able to see that like tri-lobe pattern matches up with the tri-lobe pattern. So this goes in like so. And it should push all the way down, making sure the motor can clears completely past that dovetail section. And when you push it all the way down, you should have the screw holes lining up nicely here. So now we're going to grab our 2mm hex wrench, and we're going to, want to secure these. I don't know if it's completely necessary to use Loctite here, but it definitely wouldn't hurt, so I'm going to. Now we are going to need a slightly different setup for the back wheels as we used on the DartBox motors, because these have a different size shaft. So even though I could reuse the same TPU hubs and tires and just swap the hex hub, I'm going to grab a fresh set of back wheels because obviously I have a lot more than just one set on hand, since I have enough parts to make dozens of kits. But for now, we'll just install those 3 face mount screws in this right side motor. Dipping the screw in our blue Loctite. Loctite is what's known as an anaerobic thread locker, which basically means it cures in the absence of oxygen or absence of air. And essentially, that means you can leave this sitting out forever and it won't cure. But when it's squeezed into the little gaps between threads, it will suddenly start to cure. That said, the full cure takes about 24 hours to reach full strength, and it won't really even start resisting loosening the screw for more than about half an hour unless you use a special activator solution. So this is not the sort of thing you want to be doing at the competition. You should really be doing this the night before. Anything that uses Loctite should be done at the worst the night before your first tournament. Preferably a full 24 hours ahead of time. So, stick our left motor in. Again, arrows pointing towards the shaft and the wheel. There we go. And we should be able to turn the shaft and see the motor can spin freely without it rubbing on anything. Just make absolutely sure that that happens and there isn't some sort of bit of plastic sticking out in your mounts that might be messing things up. If there is, pull the motor out and see if you can clean it up with some sandpaper or something, but that shouldn't happen. All right, so now we've got these installed, but we are missing a crucial component, which is the wire guard. This will prevent wires from getting tangled up in the motor can. So these little dovetail shaped pieces will just stick in like so. They don't really click into place with this version, but once they're installed, the lid will prevent them from coming out, so there'll be no way for these to come loose. And the colors for these parts and these parts might be different depending on when you get your kit and what materials I happen to have on hand. Right now I just have these gray wire guards and red motor mounts. These mounts, by the way, are printed in Bamboo Labs PETG CF, so carbon fiber PETG, and it's quite durable, impact resistant, and fairly heat resistant. I would not recommend printing these parts if you want to make spares in random PLA, as they could get quite hot and start to deform. So just keep that in mind. Let me grab the 6mm hex hubs I need so I can install the rear wheels. All right, so I've got my rear hubs and rear tires. Yours will come pre-assembled, but these are actually just standard Lego tires. You can buy them on bricklink.com if you want to buy some spares. These are 43.2 by 14mm tires. It says it right there, I believe, if that comes up on camera. So you can 3D print your own spare TPU hubs and slide these on, and then they seem to grip onto the TPU quite well, even without any glue or anything. And now, of course, we have our 6mm bore hex hubs. These ones came without the set screws pre-installed. So again, we need to dip the set screws in some blue Loctite. These set screws are silver instead of black, but same deal as before. Dip the screw and then install it in the flat side. And we want it to be just a bit below flush. And repeat times 4. All right, so again, just like on the other wheels, we're gonna stick these through flats and the set screw facing the sides with the holes, and they just push through until the set screw lines up with the hole. Rinse and repeat with wheel number 2. Now you're going to want to stick your hex wrench through. You'll notice that the set screws protrude in here, so you're going to have to back them out a bit, but not so much that they aren't threaded into the aluminum at all. Just so you can pass the motor shafts through them. There might be a little bit of a burr in the way, but you should be able to force the shaft through. And pulley side towards the motor shaft, of course. Now with these, you want them to be not rubbing on the mount, but just spaced out the tiniest bit past that, like so. Just a little bit of a gap there. And again, you want the set screws to line up, one of the set screws to line up with the flat on the motor shaft. That's quite important. So when we tighten this down, see it kind of reorient itself so it's nice and flush to that flat, and give it nice and snug tighten. And there we go. That's not coming off. Left side done, onto the right. That should be good. There we go. That one just took a little bit more convincing. All right, so again, we just want the slightest bit of a gap between the hub and the face of the motor here, and we want a set screw to line up with the flat on the shaft. So tighten the flat side first. It's not going to move on to the other side, wasn't it? There we go. So now we've got our right side and our left side. But again, we need to loop them around the belts first. So we're going to do that, and then that. Careful not to get your wires tangled up. And eventually you'll want the speed controllers to sit kind of like in here, that little gap in the back there. So first let's secure these with the screws from the bottom. So again, we're going to grab 4 black number 6 plastites that are 1/2 inch long. You're going to pull back, so you're squeezing this against the back of the chassis. Put the screw in the bottom there, tighten it up. Don't overly tighten because you could strip out the plastic threads. There we go. And then rinse and repeat on the right. You might have to slide it forward and back a little bit so you can get it to line up perfectly. There we go. And we should see there's very minimal gap back here and back here. And we can turn the front wheels and the belt's not skipping, so you've got pretty good tension. Also, just make sure this belt shouldn't be rubbing on here. If it is, you might just want to loosen your set screws and pop the wheel out a little bit further on that left side. In fact, I'll just do that now. I just want to slide the wheel a little bit further down the shaft. Maybe there is good. Again, tightening the flatted shaft side first. And then again, loop it through the belt. Press it against the back. Slide it over so it's positioned properly. Tighten it down. There we go. That is a lot better, so we don't have the belt rubbing on anything. Cool. All right, so now we have to plug in all of our cables again. So I'll start with the channel 2 white wire and black wire to the outside, white wire to the inside. Now I'll do my channel 1. Now I'm doing left motor to channel 1, right motor to channel 2. Oops, I lost my little wire guard dovetail piece. Don't want to forget that. There we go. And then for power, again, it doesn't really matter which power ports, they're all kind of the same. So I'll plug into those two. Servo goes back on for channel 3. And then we'll grab our 4-cell battery this time. Plug that in right there. And now the speed controllers, if we get the battery out of the way, speed controllers should be able to sit kind of like this right back here. We can cram most of the wiring back there as well. Make sure it's not going to interfere with the lid. And the battery should fit snugly there. We can take the little balance lead and shove it in. Cool. Now let's just turn this on and make sure it more or less works. All right. Now have that working. So channel 2 is controlling this motor, channel 1 is controlling this motor. We now have to do our drive mixing. Whoops, so it actually does what we want. So I'll go over that in a hot minute. So next, let's set up our arm's endpoints. So we want to make sure that it's not trying to stall the arm through the chassis like it's trying to do now, and also doesn't crush the battery when it goes to go too far back when you push all the way up. So to fix those, we're going to go to next page, next page, next page, next page. We're going to page 7 out of 12, the outputs page, which I really hope it'll focus on. There we go. So the outputs page, we're going to go to channel 3, which is our throttle, and edit this. Now, if your arm isn't behaving the way you want, by the way, that might be because I also did one other thing on the inputs page, which is I set the throttle to weight minus 100. You can accomplish the same thing on the outputs page. I'll show that now. So if your arm is doing like up is down and down is up and you don't like that, you can also go to the outputs page and go to channel 3, edit, and then on direction, we just switch this to invert or INV. And that way it is now up is up and down is down, which is how I prefer it. Now we also want to set the endpoints so that the arm isn't trying to drive itself through the robot. So to do that, we're going to set the chassis on the flat surface of choice. And now what we're going to do is we are going to go minimum, and I'm just going to back it off to like minus 50 or something, and maximum back it off to like 50 or something, and with the stick in the middle roughly. And then I'm going to push the stick all the way down, and then so we're going to start bringing the minimum closer to minus 100. And we're just going to get right to the point where the arm is nice and flat to the table. And once we're there, and it looks like in my case it's about minus 81, we're just going to stop, tap to change it to max. And then we'll do the same thing here. We'll just push all the way up. And here it's going too far, so I'm just going to back it off a bit until about there. For the maximum, in this case I'm at like 68.3. You basically just want it to the point where the arm is sticking out enough that it'll roll back onto its wheels if it tips over on its back. So that looks good. We're just going to hit return, and that should save everything. So there's your endpoints set up for the standard arm. And you'll have to repeat this process if you switch to the anti-horizontal arm as well. So that's everything for this. I'm also going to show another thing that's useful, which is dual rates, after I show the mixing setup for the brushless drive. So you can ignore this if you're doing brush drive, but for brushless drive, we also have to set up drive mixing. And the reason why is that the WEKA for the brushed version does mixing for you, but the brushless single speed controllers don't communicate with each other, so they do not know what they need to do. So right now, by default, if I push right, I have it so that the left and right, which is channel 1 in this case. So left and right stick is channel 1, up and down on right stick is channel 2. So you want to make sure that you swap your your speed controller signal cables on the motherboard if this is wrong, but you want forward and backward to control the right motor, and left and right to control the left motor. So just make sure the channel 1 is the left motor and channel 2 is the right motor. Next, we're going to go back to our outputs page, and we are going to make sure the directions of these motors are correct. So our goal here is to make it so when we push forward, this right motor turns forward. Right now it's backwards. And when we push to the right, this left motor turns forwards, which also right now it's backwards. So we have to invert them both. So we'll just go into the inputs, edit, and go down to direction and invert, and then return, return, and then do the same thing for channel 2, direction, invert, return, return. So now when we push forward, that motor spins the correct direction. We push to the right, that motor spins the correct direction. So now we can actually mix them together. And to do that, we just go back a page to mixes. So all of these terms might not make any sense because these radios are kind of configured for like drones or airplanes. So the AIL or aileron channel is your channel 1, and your ELE or elevator channel is channel 2. But those are just as we showed before. This is AIL and this is ELE. So we're gonna select, hold to select, hit insert after, and then under source, you just press once to select, and then you can just move the stick you want to do. So in this case, we want to mix aileron and elevator together. So we're just going to push up or down. And now you can see all of a sudden, when we push forward, it actually goes forward with both drive sides. When we push backwards, it goes backwards with both drive sides. So now let's just hit return, return, and get back to this page. But when we push to the right, we aren't mixing anything. So what we did was we basically just added channel 1 to channel 2, or sorry, channel 2 to channel 1, but we didn't add channel 1 to channel 2 yet. So we'll just repeat the same thing again here. Whoops. We're gonna do insert after, and this time we select the aileron channel. Now we push to the right and the left, we also see the kit trying to drive forwards and backwards, which is not what we want. We want it to steer. And so instead of plus or minus plus 100 aileron, we're just gonna go to this weight option, and we're just gonna scroll until we get to, scroll to the left until we get to negative 100. And this should do what we want, I believe. Yeah, it looks like it will. So we go to minus 100 here. And that way, when we push to the right, the kit tries to turn to the right. We push to the left, the kit tries to turn to the left. We push forward, it goes forward. When we push backwards, it goes backwards. And all of that is hunky-dory. Now, if your kit is steering the wrong way or something like that, by changing plus 100 to minus 100 in some combination of these 4 options, you'll always be able to get it driving correctly. And technically, you don't even have to swap the signal cables. I just figured as long as everyone's doing the same setup that I have, it'll be consistent throughout, so it's easier to show in an instructional video. In this case, we have it set up so we inverted both 1 and 2, And then it's aileron plus 100 elevon for channel 1, and elevator or plus negative 100 aileron for channel 2. And that works perfectly for the drive mixing. So great. Now we have set up our endpoints and we've set up our drive mixing. And last thing is I want to show how to make your bot drive in a way that's a lot nicer to control. So for this, we're going to go to the Inputs tab. We're going to select, hold down, and then hit Edit for our aileron channel, because this is our steering channel. And notice we have a couple options here. The most important ones here are weight and Expo. So weight is kind of like the dual rates on the FSI 6, and Expo is also similar to an option on the FSI 6. So right now I have Expo at 30. I'm just going to set it to 0 so I can demonstrate kind of what these do. Set these both to the default values. So basically what this is going to do is for channel 1, the aileron channel, if we push to the right all the way, the kit tries to spin to the right really, really fast. A lot of people say that the steering on the SSP kit's really twitchy and they have a hard time controlling it, and that's usually because they haven't either turned the weight down or increased the Expo. So we're going to set the weight to like, I'll just show as I scroll it down. So at like 70%, now we're only getting 70% the speed when we go all the way with the stick. And then if we go to Expo and we increase this to like 30, what this will do is if we go like halfway with the stick, if we go halfway with the stick and don't move it, as we increase the exponential, it gets slower. And that way we have more sensitive control over the first little bit of the steering range. All right, and the very last thing to cover with this setup here is how to install the wedge and anti-horizontal arm setup and get that installed in the bot. Now, in this case, I'm going to pretend that you bought some spare parts because I have a stockpile of spare parts already. So you don't have to take apart the standard arm to get the arm fork needed for the anti-horizontal arm. And you'll have plenty of screws to install everything. So I'm just going to be showing this as if you had maybe printed some spare parts or have some extra spare parts around, like an extra pivot support, and aren't going to have to disassemble this setup to form the new setup. So yeah, let's start by popping off the dovetailed barb forks here. And we can kind of get this guy up and out of the way and install our wedge onto our wedge mounts. This is pretty straightforward and obvious. There's 6 holes in the wedge on each side and 6 holes in each wedge mount. So you just need to line up the holes like so. You can kind of get a screw started with your fingers, usually, and then tighten them all down with a screwdriver or an electric driver of your choice. All right, with all 12 of those screws installed, which should look like that, and then it just pops onto the front with the dovetails the exact same way that the forks do, of course. Now, of course, we have to contend with the arm assembly. So I'm gonna first pull the standard arm out, unplug it from the motherboard, remove these 2 screws and then the 4 on the bottom, and then I'll show how to assemble the horizontal arm assembly. All right, with all that out, it should just pop out like that. Now I'm showing the anti-horizontal arm assembly using the brushless servo. This one is going to be maybe a little bit different from ones that will come with the kits if you buy the brushless version of the kit in the future, because its cable is super, super long. But otherwise, the assembly is pretty much exactly the same as with this setup. The only difference is that this servo is quite a bit shorter, so there's a bit of a gap back here, and I might design a 3D printed spacer to fill that gap with the shorter cable ones, but for this long cable one, you can kind of just coil the cable up behind it to fill that gap, and that works just as well. It's not really that important that it can't shift left and right because the pivot support already prevents it from shifting left and right, but just as an extra little precaution there. So to start off, first, of course, we need to power this up and make sure that we have it in the downmost position, just like we did with the standard arm, before we attach anything. So I'm going to use my Radio Master Zorro for this one, and I'm going to have to switch the kit on. There we go. So that's got the servo in the downmost position now. And I'll leave that powered for now while we assemble the rest. Actually, I'll unplug this. We can always bring it back later. So next, we've got our anti-horizontal TPU arm, and we've got our arm fork. This is an extra one that I have. And we've got our 3 flush nut PEM nuts. So we're gonna put those in this side of the arm, kind of just like we did for the standard arm. And in this case, they're being a little tricky, so I'll tap them into place. There we go. And now we can just put my thumb, I'll just put my thumb over so those don't fall out. And we need to grab, or this will work better. So I'll just put my index finger over here so those PEM nuts don't fall out. We need to grab 3 of our M3 by 12 millimeter flathead screws. And those go into these 3 countersunk holes in the arm. And they'll get secured with the 2 millimeter hex wrench. So I'll just do the middle one to start. Then the front and the back. I'll just tighten those until the screw is like just protruding out. There we go. So that's the whole anti-horizontal arm assembled, other than we of course need to have the steel insert arm, which I already put in here, but of course you need another steel servo horn if you don't want to take it out from your standard arm. Plop that in, and then grab your one more of the M3 by 12 flatheads, stick it in there, and secure it into place. Again, we just kind of want the threads to just about be flush with the arm, just like we did for the standard arm, like so. And now we can actually install it onto the servo, but we need to power up the bot first and make sure it's in that downmost position with the radio connected. So there we go. And with this positioned like that, we want this guy to be right about there. That works. Now grab one of our 35 millimeter long shoulder bolts through a pivot support and then into the arm assembly and secure that into place. And now we can just install this just like we did the standard arm assembly. And of course this is identical for the standard servo or brushless servo, just that I have this extra cable length to deal with this version that I'll tuck away just like that. And now I can put my servo clamp back in. Unplug the battery because I don't need that connected anymore. And then the 4 screws for the pivot support. And then last but not least, you'll probably want to adjust the end points so that the servo doesn't travel too high up, because now it will crush things again if you go too far back. So we'll just real quick go to our outputs page, edit channel 3, and adjust our minimum and maximum. So it looks like we want the arm to go maybe slightly further down. I'm not sure if that's the min or max. So we want to go slightly further down and set the maximum to not be nearly as high. Maybe about there should be good. And there we go. So now we've set our new travel range as well, and we should be hunky-dory. And that's all there is to it. Anti-horizontal setup acquired. And of course, if you want to switch between the fully assembled like sub-assemblies back and forth, it should only take a couple minutes. It just took longer because we had to build the sub-assemblies while we did it. But still comfortably able to be done in a 20-minute pit stop between fights. There we have it. You've finally put together your probably first beetleweight combat robot. Be proud of yourself, because I hope it will be the first of many to come.